Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Senator, for coming and answering a few questions. One of the concerns I have about bills like this is sort of in the enforcement and how we know category. So let me start with, what is the relationship between this bill and HIPAA, which prevents doctors from revealing information about their patients to other people without the patient's permission? Let's say a woman goes in, gets a diagnosis that the child has Down syndrome, the fetus does, and let's say it's accurate, put that issue aside. What is the obligation of the doctor or the woman at that point, and who do they have to tell?
Well, I imagine these conversations are still between them, just like when the legislature passed Chloe's law. It was prior to my time. I think it might have been 2014, in providing certain information to the families on the services and things that are out there for children with Down syndrome. I don't foresee that anyone would tell, and quite frankly, I don't know if any of us would know whether or not that decision was made based on that diagnosis. But you could apply the same situation to the gender protection, the gender conversation that we already have in law as well.
I would have opposed that as well, for many of the same reasons, which I'll expand on, but I just want to understand. So if under the laws as proposed, if a woman gets a diagnosis that there's an issue with Down syndrome, and she goes to an abortion clinic a week later and just says, I'm here for an abortion, there is no requirement that her doctor inform the clinic, or that she inform the clinic, or that the clinic do any due diligence or whatever it is to determine whether or not there's been a diagnosis of Down syndrome.
Well, in essence, what you wouldn't be able to do is get the abortion based on the fact that the child has Down syndrome. And the doctors, which unfortunately occurs still to this day, we have many people who have come out with doctors at the time that they revealed that the test came back positive, saying, well, we can take care of that, without any pain to the baby, or encouraging them to do it. I'm actually was reading a letter here earlier where a doctor was basically encouraging a woman to abort her child because of the fact that the baby was diagnosed with Down syndrome. That practice would not be able to occur.
Okay, but other than that practice, if under my hypothetical, if a woman went into an abortion clinic and said, I would like an abortion, there's no requirement, there's no way that the abortion clinic would know, correct?
To my knowledge, no, okay. That they would not, and obviously, just like with the gender selection, it just can't be, she can't declare that she wants to have the abortion for that reason, okay, just as much as she can't do it because the child's supposed to be female.
Okay, and if she's silent on that, however, there's no way anyone would ever know, there'd be no further enforcement of that law, correct?
To my knowledge, I don't know how that would occur.
Okay, along the same lines, if a person, let's say someone does know, if a person goes into an abortion clinic and says, I would like an abortion, I received a diagnosis of Down syndrome, but that's not why I'm getting it. I'm getting it for economic reasons. What would happen then?
I don't know the answer to that. She cannot get it for the reason of Down syndrome.
Right. But if she says it's for another reason, is that enough, or is there going to be some legal procedure to try to determine the subjective intent of the woman when she seeks the abortion?
I don't believe there's anything in law that could do that, unless you would say that she's having that abortion for the reason of Down syndrome or having it for the reason of gender selection.
Okay. So it would have to be pretty much a voluntary self-disclosure is the only way that this law would be enforceable.
Well, she could not. You would not be able to get the abortion based solely on the Down syndrome diagnosis, and the doctors would obviously not be able to encourage the abortion to occur based on that diagnosis of Down syndrome.
Now, you're familiar with it. Can you just tell us what is the test that is used to determine if a child in utero has Down syndrome? Do you know?
Yeah. Pardon it.
No, take your time. That's fine.
Was offered the test when we had our kids, but we refused it.
And I ask not rhetorically, but
someone else knows it while we're looking.
I'm not an expert on this. Is it ultrasound? Is it amniocentesis? Is it if anyone knows that? Well, it's a good thing we're passing laws on this.
It's amniocentesis, isn't it?
Who's going to vote for it?
Yeah, I believe they can do it through amniocentesis and also through a blood test as well.
Okay. And are there other reasons unrelated to Down syndrome that women get these tests?
There could be.
And given that, are we worried at all that this law will discourage women from getting such tests if they feel that the information may be used against them in some future proceeding?
No, I think obviously there's nothing that precludes anyone from receiving that test in law, and some refuse it today, some get it today, some get it and regardless of what comes back, still choose to have the baby. However, that's obviously a decision between them and their doctor.
Okay, two more questions or areas of inquiry. Number one, I'm just wondering what the limiting principle is here, by which I mean, and the chairman in his opening remarks said, you know, we don't want to decide who's going to live or who's going to die by classifications of people. So I'm just wondering why Down syndrome and not Tay-Sachs disease, or not one of 100 other diseases I could mention that could be diagnosed that a child is having in utero. I mean, why would we not also ban abortions for basically anyone who had any medical issue? Why just Down syndrome?
Well, obviously, this is a prevalent one that we're hearing a lot about currently. Obviously, people get tests for many different reasons, but for me personally, with this one, which is not as invasive, can be done without much invasive surgery or procedures on the child, really lends to where we're going in terms of developments in technology for genetic testing. I don't think this will be the last time. I think there's going to be other things that start to occur. To me, I put it in the same category as not only with the gender selection, but if someone said they wanted to abort based on race, or the possibility for a predisposition to cancer or addiction or many other things. And is that the kind of society that we want to have, looking for the perfect human being, which not one single one exists? I think this is going to continue to be an issue in our society, and I think we have a moral obligation to address it.
Okay, so you don't think this will be the last such bill? There'll be increasing numbers of conditions, et cetera, that we'll want to create the same sort of protections for?
I mean, obviously, as testing keeps getting more and more clear, especially in the area of genetics, and people are able to do that there's going to be practices that are developed for folks who basically say, you know, well, I don't want a child with this, or I don't want a child with that.
Are there any legitimate, for example, encephalitic babies are born with fluid where their brain should be, right? Is that this, in your view, is that the sort of thing we'd want to protect that as well?
Is that something that you can test for in
Yes,
the
you
womb?
can test for that now.
I don't know the answer to that. That's not what this bill addresses. But the Down syndrome one is probably a very prevalent one going on right now, not only because of things that we heard in Iceland with the eradication of Down syndrome, which wasn't the case. They weren't curing Down syndrome as a condition. They were basically eliminating people and calling it the cure. And for me, as we see the positive results of folks with Down syndrome and how they live their lives, swimming the English Channel, doing amazing things. I just had a young lady in my office the other day. Some people think that she doesn't have a life worth living, when in fact she's in college, she's dating, and I think the whole world sees this much different. I think it's a disabilities rights issue, quite frankly.
Okay. Although under that logic, it seems like, you know, there's a lot of people without any medical conditions who go to college and win Olympic medals, et cetera. So that's a reason not to allow abortion, I guess, for any purpose.
Well, the irony in that is they were given the right to live.
Right. No, and to my point, this isn't specific to Down syndrome. It's an attempt to reduce the availability of women's opportunity to have abortions generally. Correct?
What was the question in that?
Well, all right, I'll just say the comments. Final question. I did some legal research. I can't promise it was comprehensive, A, because I didn't have all the time in the world yesterday, and B, because that wasn't my strongest suit in law school. So maybe you can correct me, but I have not found any case where the final disposition in a court was upholding a ban on abortions in the first trimester for any reason, a complete ban on abortions for any reason in the first trimester. Are you aware of any, because this would cover all 9 months, right? So are you aware of any, I know there was a case I read in Indiana where they struck this specific law down because the Supreme Court said in the first trimester the woman has basically complete discretion. Are you aware of any cases that have ruled the other way?
No, I think there's some currently in progress. I know there's some that were challenged because they were attached to things like fiscal notes. There's different challenges that are out there. I think regardless of the challenge, it's an issue that we're working on here in Pennsylvania, and obviously I would not doubt that there potentially would be a legal challenge to it. But for me, the purpose of why we're fighting for with these children it's to me greater than that.
I have one more question because I'm organizing my thoughts for comments, and there was a comment that occurred to me, but I don't want to misrepresent what you're saying, so I just want to clarify it. Because you've talked a lot about the quality of life that children with Down syndrome can live. There are certain conditions which are diagnosable now, genetic diseases. I mentioned encephalitic babies. I meant, babies who are going to be born and they have a genetic condition such that, like familial dysautonomia or other things where they're likely to die in a couple years, 3-4 years, maybe there's a few that you can make it to teenage years. There's a lot of different conditions, and that you'll be profoundly developmentally challenged and physically challenged or whatever. In cases like that, where there is not a high prospect for what you call a quality of life, is it your position that abortion would be justified, at least if the woman wants one, in those sorts of situations?
You're asking someone who I'm very much pro-life. I think every life is worth living and given a shot. I think for us to judge that, if a child only lives 4 years, as how much value that has to a family, at least from the families that I come across, it's some of the most defining things in their life. In terms of the joy that those children had brought. So I personally am on, if you're asking me what my personal viewpoint is I believe every child deserves a right to life.
Okay,
but today, this bill obviously is focused just on the Down syndrome protection.
And I'm a little bit of a disadvantage because you're the only person answering these questions, and I have to attribute what you're saying to the broader issue. But I'm just trying to see, because there's a lot of things that have been said about the quality of life, and I'm just wondering if that is a relevant distinction to people who are pushing this legislation. I just wanted to clarify that. So thank you.
Well, let's take a roll call.
Can we comment? Are we going to have time to debate the bill?
Well, we have people. Well, we've been debating it for half an hour, and
Well,
we
no,
have.
I've been asking questions.
And well, it's the same thing, and we have people waiting to come in here. The transportation committees has told me that they have people waiting to come in and use the room.
Well, then I make a motion that we hold over the bill until the next time that we have a meeting. I mean, this is a really important issue, and to say that we're not going to have the time to debate it because there's another committee meeting seems like a frivolous reason to stop discussion on something that's going to affect a lot of people's lives.
We haven't stopped the discussion. We'll allow you to talk for half an hour.
You've allowed me to, I don't know who else has things they want to say, but you've allowed me to ask questions, but no one's allowed anyone to actually make the points they want to make in debate.
Go ahead.
All right. Well, I'll try to be quick, but I think it's important to get this out there. There's as I in my last question indicated, there's sort of a little bit of a strange logic, and I certainly respect the gentleman's position, but there was a lot of talk about we're going to protect these children with Down syndrome because children with Down syndrome can lead decent lives, and that's absolutely true. But the logical flaw in that, of course, is that children without Down syndrome can live reasonably decent lives, including children with absolutely no medical conditions. Further, it was clear that living a decent life is not or the possibility of that is not a dispositive issue. Doesn't matter if you can live a decent life, even if you're going to live what most people would consider a really, extremely challenged life. Then that would also, that deserves protection too. And there were some statements about some families have found that even very challenging babies have been extremely valuable to them, which I don't doubt. But I think that's why we leave it up to the family to make that decision. There have been families who've struggled horribly with these situations. And so, you know, before a family is forced to enter into a situation like that, they should have the right to weigh in on their own rather than have us impose what we're doing. This law is, as I understand it, unless someone heard the question, the answer is differently, completely unenforceable in the sense that, you know, there is no revealing to an abortion clinic that what the woman's diagnosis was, if any. Further, even if the woman has a diagnosis, and even if it is revealed somehow, and a newspaper publishes it, if the woman has an alternative reason, they'd still be allowed to get the abortion. So I'm not sure I understand what the law actually does, and that troubles me. The final thing I would say is that, you know, there are no cases, as we say, we all take an oath to uphold the Constitution. There's not one case where a first trimester ban on abortion has been upheld in any federal court in America. And so, you know, why we would pass laws that, again, there is, you know, repeatedly have been ruled unconstitutional seems to be something that's at least problematic when it comes to our oath. So I just wanted to have a chance to say that, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity.